Welcome to the Askewville Assembly of God Sermon Podcast. We're so glad you've taken the time to listen, and we pray this message from our pastors will be a blessing on your life this week.
Pastor Kevin and I are going to be preaching this sermon together today, the second installment of I'll Be Home for Christmas, signed Jesus. Jesus saying to us, I'll be home for Christmas. Last week, Pastor Kevin took us into the home in which he left. Jesus leaving heaven to come to earth, to enter into our mess, all the majesty, all the beauty, all the glory of heaven that he was willing to leave on behalf of us to come here. He talked about how it was creation central, how it was the place where we were thought up, how he receives our prayers and deals with all the things of man, angels around his throne at all times, the glory of heaven, how Jesus was willing to leave all that to enter into our mess. And so this year, if we can remind ourselves, God left his home to come to ours. How much more should we make sure that we're bringing him into our home, that we are keeping him as the focus in our home? And the way he ended last week was talking about the importance of prayer and Bible reading during this season, reminding ourselves, reminding our families of who Jesus is. And so what I wanted to key in on today, and the reason we're going to preach this together side by side is I want to make sure that we are not missing a single part of how perfectly, intricately woven, great, magnanimous, beautiful, the story of who Jesus is, the majesty of Jesus, which is what Pastor Kevin was talking about last week, the majesty in which he left to enter into the humility of our humanity. What he came into, not only, like we could have provided him a better family, you know? If only we would have known, we could have had the best hotel in Bethlehem set aside for him, and yet he gets born in a cave. We weren't even ready. We weren't even looking for him, yet that's the time he decided to come. And when he comes on the scene, he doesn't come roaring like a lion. He comes cooing like a baby. And so I want us to just really think about the two sides of that today. The night in which he came to us, when immortality entered into mortality, when eternity entered into our short, difficult, sometimes disgusting life, what Jesus was willing to do for us. So last week's focus was on the majesty of the home in which he left. Today, I want to talk about the family, the home in which he came into. And but it's an interesting thing, as we start in Matthew, we're going to try to do this like a conversation. We're going to try to, okay? But we're going to talk about the humanity of what he came into, the family in which he came into, and what that must have been like for an infinite being to be introduced to so much finiteness, so much smallness, so much difficulty. So today the message is from majesty to humanity.
And maybe I should just say, since you have both of us this morning preaching, that in conclusion, we'll go ahead and get that out front, that we're going to go ahead and start our conclusion now because there's two preachers preaching at the same time.
That means we get six of them. So
some of you will get that when you get home, and it's 2 o'clock. No, I'm teasing. Just want to take a minute as we get started and just read through part of the genealogy, because we're going to read out of Matthew. And I think it's very important as we look at it, as we look at the book of Matthew, because Matthew starts out the genealogy with two pretty important people in the line of Jesus. Yeah. And as we read that, as you understand genealogies obviously they follow a family tree. But for, especially in this time, it was important because they helped follow priestly and royal lines through Israel's story, through the whole story of Israel and all that took place. A genealogy was of great importance. So it wasn't just like Matthew thought, well, let's make a few boring 3 minutes for everybody to read my book, and then we'll get going with the great stuff. No, this was of great importance when Matthew put it there. So I want to take a minute and just read part of it to you. I'm not going to read the whole first chapter, but I want to read part of this genealogy so you'll understand the significance of where Jesus came from, and it's going to help point to the reason why he came. So I want to start in Genesis before I read Matthew, because it's going to help show you just a moment what Matthew starts with. In Genesis chapter 12, 1 through 3, it reads like this. Now the Lord said to Abraham, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you, check out this last line, in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. All the families of the earth. That means you, that means us, that means everybody in this room, everybody watching online. Your families will be blessed. So now I want you to go to Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1 starts out like this. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. We already just read in Genesis why that's important that he puts this. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez, and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and if I mess up a few of these names, you'll understand why. And Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Solomon, Solomon the father of Boaz by Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse, now listen, watch how he puts this. See, everybody else up to this point, he didn't put what their title was. He didn't say anything about what their position was, what their title was, what they did for a living until this point. And he says, and Jesse, the father of David, the king. How interesting. Because from the very beginning of the book of Matthew, he is wanting us to understand that Jesus comes from the very beginning. The prophecies started from the very beginning of Genesis, of the book of the Bible, the first book of the Bible. It starts there saying, listen, all the earth shall be blessed because of what's coming through you. And then he brings it down not only for that, but he breaks it down now and says the only person that he gives the title is David the king.
So far he's traced the lineage from the son of promise. Abraham has given the promise to all of us, and now the kingly line as well. And so Jesus is destined to be the answer to the promise and of the fixing of the kingly line. Well, let's stop right here for just a second. I'm gonna let you keep reading, but he mentions some women in here.
So, interestingly enough, let's read and see who it is. Because if it were you and I writing this, if you and I were writing the Bible, probably would have put Sarah, the wife of Abraham, or some other women like Sarah in there. But read who he puts. And David, and he goes through the kings just a minute. He goes through the lineage of the kings. And after he gets through there, we're going to go down here to... It's right here. And David was the father of Solomon, the wife of Uriah. And Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam, the father of Abijah, and Abijah, the father of Asaph, and Asaph, the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat, the father of Joram, and Joram, the father of Uzziah. See, he didn't even put here that Uzziah was king. And Uzziah, the father of Jotham, and Jotham, the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah, the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh, the father of Amos, and Amos, the father of Josiah, Josiah, the father of Jeconiah, and the brothers, and his brothers. He doesn't even mention there that they're kings. And partly because I think it's, and some writers would say, some historians would say, he didn't mention the brothers' names, although they were kings, because they were in such disobedience to God that he didn't even, but I thought it was interesting if he would have put them in there. And the time of deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok. And he continues on, and until he gets to the end, he says, Jacob the father of Joseph, and husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ.
I think it would have been more interesting if he would have left in all the disobedient ones. I mean, what I want us to see here is in a genealogy, you only talk from father to son, father to son, father to son. But Matthew goes out of his way to show us 4 women in the story. 4 women that he mentions, and again, it's not Sarah, the mother of promise. It's not Leah, the mother of Israel. There's a lot of women in the Old Testament that would be worthy of honor, and yet the 4 women he shows is, number 1, he chooses Tamar. I'm just telling you, if you're going to talk about your family tree, leave this story out. Tamar, the story of Tamar is Judah did not give Tamar his youngest boy, which was a part of the culture at that particular time. So Tamar dresses up as a woman of the night, and seduces her father-in-law as that. And then the lineage that Jesus is entered into is the children of that night. If y'all have got cousins like that, don't you leave that part out? Why in the world, if Matthew was trying to show the genealogy of promise and the genealogy of kingship, would he put Tamar's story in there? The second one is Rahab. Y'all know that story, right? It was the first place when the people came into the promised land. It was the first city they went into and destroyed them. It was the one where they walked around Jericho. The reason they got the information they had about Jericho is because Rahab had kept the spies safe while they were looking at Jericho, and her whole family was saved. It's really interesting. But do you remember? Y'all Google it. Y'all know what she did for a living? Like, these Jewish boys shouldn't have even gone to her house, even if they were scared. Like, she was in the red light district. The red robe, the red rope that she put on the outside may have even been a sign of that. Yikes. Leave her out. She's a foreigner. She's not even pure bloodline. She's got that kind of a background. I mean, what is Matthew doing? Why would he remind us of such parts of this story? Rahab is a part of the royal bloodline. Jesus is in this family filled with foreigners, Gentiles, gross Gentiles like me and you. And he's going out of his way to prove that this is the case, that it may be pure through the men's bloodline, but that there's been lots of taint in the blood. You know, as Paul puts it about that type of sin, souls being connected in all kinds. How many souls did Rahab connect into the bloodline of Jesus? All right, I'm moving on, but I'm just thinking, I mean, brought the Gentiles through the bloodline. How about the third one? Ruth. Now, she seems pretty perfect, except for if you are in an Israeli-centric culture. Do y'all remember where she's from? Moab. At the time that Ruth comes on the scene, they hated Moabites more than they hated Philistines. They weren't nearly as afraid of the Philistines as they were the Moabites. They were a subgroup of people. They didn't like them. And here's Ruth, once again, another foreigner, and she's like, what, the grandma of David? Like, it's not even a few generations away from the holy king. Then we have to mention Solomon in the line, the wisest man. Have you ever thought about the redemption the redemption that had to take place from how ugly the story of Bathsheba was and the story of David, and yet the wisest man who ever walked the earth came out of that relationship. Look, this should comfort us. How many of you have some circumstances that you feel like God can receive no glory from? There is nothing that he can do to redeem this enough. There is some ugliness in our family, maybe, or within ourselves, or situations that we're around, and we think there's no way God can get any glory out of it. And yet we are reminded that even the Son of God can come from a lineage full of this disgusting stuff. I doubt anybody in here has a Rahab in their family. I doubt it. I'm not saying you don't. If you do, we may need to counsel this week. I don't know. We'll just work on that later. But what I want you to understand is that it may take some time, but there's nothing that God cannot redeem. There's not a level of humanity that you can sink to that Jesus doesn't know how to come down into. If his own family is filled with this kind of filth, do not think it impossible for God to fix yours. Do not think it impossible for God to fix your family, your bloodline. That which the devil has chosen to taint, God can restore. He can bring it back to pass. Now, the fifth lady he mentions is Mary, and she's pretty good. I mean, she was unmarried when she had her first child. It was not in her hometown, so she didn't even have like the comforts of her friends. It was probably in a cave somewhere. We say, pasture, we picture these nice Askewville barns, but probably not. Most likely a cave. All the animals are seeing it. The first people who come are shepherds, nasty nighttime shepherds, right? We'll get to that in a minute. Don't forget God came into your humanity exactly the way it is. You don't have to clean up your humanity to have Jesus come in. I wanted to show a little clip today, and I forgot it, and now I'm beating myself up. But there was a rock and roll band that came out of this church years and years and years ago. And they had a song on there that the first line in it was, "What would you do if Jesus came to spend some time with..." You remember that, Donald Ray? I've listened to that song a bunch of times, and I've reminded myself over and again, I do not have to clean my house for Jesus to come, because when he gets there, he'll help me clean it himself. If today you've been running away, why don't you open your doors and let him in? And whatever it is that he says he doesn't want, how about you get rid of it? Because there's nothing that he won't enter into.
And I think it's interesting that Matthew does show us that in the lineage of Jesus, there's pain. There's pain involved. There's people who went through things that you can't look back at the story of Jesus. You can't look back at the lineage of Jesus and say, you know what, it's all pure. Everybody's, I can't ever attain this. I can't ever live up to the standard of the line of Jesus. Jesus, he does this so that we can look and say, you know what, it doesn't matter what our background. It doesn't matter what we've gone through. It doesn't matter what we've been through. We're a part of this. We're a part of what's going on. We're a part of the story of Jesus. We're a part of that story, not only now and this time, not only to your family, but to those around you. The other interesting thing that I think is interesting about the book of Matthew is that Matthew, when he includes the Magi, when he includes the wise men that come, that oftentimes it were the wise men of that time, as you read some of the history and things, it was the wise men of those days who would oftentimes realize who the king was. They would display, they would show who the king was going to be because of the signs of the time and the signs that they were watching, and they would help appoint kings. So I find that interesting that Matthew lists this in that way. So I want to just share just a minute about the wise men, because I don't know if you've ever thought about what they did and who they were, but just want to read for just a moment Matthew chapter 2. And it says this, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he inquired of where the Christ was born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who shall shepherd my people. And when Herod heard this, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined that from them what the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the young child. When you have found him, bring word to me, and I may come and worship him also. We understand as we read the story that his objective was to kill. Because he was the king. He thought there's someone else that they're claiming is going to be king. And so these wise men in their time, and again, it's interesting what their job was. What they often did was to appoint kings. And now they're coming to the king saying, hey, where is this guy? And we want to go find him. And they've been watching the sign, they've been watching the stars, not because they had nothing else to do, but that was what their job was. That was what they did. They watched the signs and the stars and figured things out. And I can't imagine the night that they see this star in the sky and they think to themselves, wow, that's bigger and brighter and a whole lot different than anything I've ever seen before. Can you imagine that moment when the wise men see this star? And so they gather together and they leave and they come to find Jesus, who's in the cave. Now think about this for a minute. They appointed kings. They were wealthy people. They were people of stature. They had riches. They had money. Yet these guys come and they go to a cave where they probably would have never visited before because of who they were. They bring some gifts with them, where two of them were probably pretty normal gifts that they may would have brought to a birth of a child, especially a king. But they bring a third gift that I don't think is on the top 5 list of top 10 list, top 100 list of gifts to bring to a brand new baby boy. It's not up there in the gifts when you talk to your family and say, hey, what gifts should we bring? When you talk to a man and say, what gift should we take? They had a baby. This gift is not one of those gifts that you would come up with. So I want to take a minute and walk through those with you. Number 1, they bring gold. Why is gold significant? Because gold is a precious metal and has been used for jewelry, for ornaments, for currency, but it's also something that they would often give to someone who was a king. It was a sign of royalty. It was a sign of who they were as a king. That was the gold. Then the next thing they brought was frankincense, incense, expensive fragrance or perfume, and it was made from the trees in India, Arabia, is incense, and hear this, it was often used mixed with oil when they would appoint priests for Israel. They would take incense, they would take frankincense and mix it with oil when they would go to anoint the new priest for Israel. Wow. Think about that for a moment. They brought gold to represent a king. They bring incense, they bring frankincense to represent a priest. And it wasn't a priest, because if you read the lineage there in Matthew there's no priest listed. Right. But it was in the line, and you preached on it not too long ago. Who was it you preached on? Melchizedek. And that line. That's right. There was no one else like him. He couldn't remember who he preached on the last time. You preached a few times since then. But if you look at that story, there was no one else. There was no one else. He didn't come from a lineage. It was only him who could fulfill that. And now Jesus steps into the scene as king. There's no other king like him. It brings wise men to a cave that they would have never gone to bring gift to a baby in a cave with animals on a cold floor that they would have never stepped into, yet they come. And not only do they come and bring gold, they bring incense, they bring frankincense as a representation to say, this is the high priest. We're bringing this to him because this is going to be a priest. And understand this, a priest to do something that no other priest in all of eternity could have done. I talked about it last week, that he stood in a place. He did something that no one else could ever do. He ripped the veil, and the veil tore in two when he was crucified. Why? Because that was a representation at that moment that you and I, that we have entrance into the presence of the high priest. Think about that. These men who adorned kings, who appointed kings, they come into his presence. And not only do they come, but the word tells us they bow down to worship him. Think about that. Think about what the wise men do on this moment. They come and they bow and they worship him. And Mary's probably thinking, what are you guys doing? Joseph's over there in the corner saying, wow, I'm not sure I'm ready for this. You know, these guys don't just do this for anybody. And he's understanding the significance of what they're bringing. But then they bring the third gift that is totally out there. They bring the myrrh. What is myrrh used for? What was myrrh, especially in those times? It was a specific kind of, it was very costly. So you need to understand that they didn't just bring some cheap perfume. They didn't just do something out of abnormal. In fact, the gifts that were not, that they weren't some just random choice of gifts. They didn't just say, oh, let's, draw straws and we'll just go and find the cheapest thing at Five Below and get it for him. They brought things that were significant and meant something. They had a purpose that cost them something. See, the question is, are we bringing gifts to Christ that cost us something?
Come on. Wow.
They cost them something. And this third gift, the myrrh, was used as a perfume made from rare bushes, actually thorn bushes. Interesting. That myrrh is a perfume made from rare thorn bushes. Think about what he did. That is used as an antiseptic anointing oil, and it's also used as an embalming fluid. Wow. Myrrh is what they would use when people died to embalm them. So not only do they bring a gift that represents him as king, not only do they bring a gift that represents his priesthood, but they bring a gift that represents his humanity. The myrrh that they bring is saying, you know what? He is human. And can you imagine the moment that they lay it down for Mary and Joseph thinking, what are they trying to say? Right. What are they trying to say to us by bringing myrrh? It's embalming fluid. That's when people die, they use this. But how cool it is that it was something made from rare thorn bushes, that they were going to place a crown of thorns on his head, that they would kill him, that they would bury him. And why? Why would they do this? Why would they why would they do it? And I think it's so significant in the story of Jesus. As we look, not only is he king, not only is he priest, but he's the one who paid a sacrifice for us. How significant the things that they brought for Jesus on that day.
Man. So the myrrh represents his humanity. I wonder if flyers went out through heaven and all the angels knew exactly what the plan was going to be. Do you think angels peering over the side of heaven, when they looked down and saw that they had brought him antiseptic, I wonder if they thought, y'all don't know who this kid is. The angels looking over and being like, he won't need that. He's God. And God the Father nodding his head, yes, he will. Because he's going to scrape his knee like every other kid. He's going to get the cold just like every other kid. He's going to hit his thumb with a hammer just like every other kid when he's working with his dad. He's going to bleed like every other person. Just like every single one of us, he's going to grieve when death takes place. He's going to hurt. With all those majestic things, the wise men coming, you know, the story of Herod, I didn't think about this before, but if something significant was going to come from Israel, it ought to be talked about in Jerusalem, and I never thought about it. It was. Because the wise men went to Jerusalem first. They told Herod, we're going to go crown the king, and then Herod was the one who went and asked, well, where should the king be born? And the priest came and said, it should be Bethlehem. So Jesus was talked about in Jerusalem even when he was a baby. The news got to Jerusalem. Now, Bethlehem, I want you to think about this for a second. How bad the timing of this was. Who thought this up? Like, who planned this out? In the year that Caesar Augustus brings out his first census, Joseph, who doesn't live anywhere near home in Bethlehem, he lives up in Nazareth, has to travel all the way back to Bethlehem with his very pregnant teenage wife. As they travel across, by the time they get to Bethlehem, she has a child very soon after. Jesus can't even be the mayor of Nazareth because he was born in Bethlehem. No? Okay, never mind. It's a joke. All right. Away from home. Now, even worse than that, everybody in town's been talking about Mary being pregnant, you know. But now, when the baby is born, she doesn't even get to turn around and go back to Nazareth. What does the angel say? Chapter 2 of Matthew, the angel says, it wakes up, Joseph apparently doesn't have a great relationship with God because the only way God can talk to Joseph is through dreams. He never hears a word from the Lord. He's only spoken to through dreams. And so Joseph is told in a dream one night, which I would take that. Hey, I don't mind dreams. Joseph is told in a dream one night, pick up your kid and go to Egypt, for Herod is coming to kill you. So in the middle of the night, they run to Egypt. They run to a foreign nation. Jesus, within a few, when it is his very, like he's not even out of being an infant yet, he's already a refugee running away from those who are trying to kill him. To another nation, scared to death. He's at the border, but there's a big Trump wall on the way. Okay, it's a joke. Okay, calm down. All right. Jesus has to run into another nation. Herod is on the lookout. He kills all the babies in Bethlehem. Can you imagine the heartbreak? How many mothers that day had their babies ripped out of their hands? And we want to act like Jesus was just some other person, but how many people do you know? Are the powers of the world so afraid that they would kill every baby in that entire mountain? Rachel cries out from Ramah over the babies that were slaughtered on her hill. After a few years, they finally get to go home. But what is Jesus' home? Not Jerusalem, not a significant place, not even Bethlehem where David comes from. His home is Nazareth, to which it is said, what good can come from Askewville? He comes from a small town, an insignificant family, and an insignificant town, and an insignificant area. If the Messiah is going to come from somewhere, it ought to come from Judah. It ought not come from Galilee. His dad is a hardworking man. Most likely Jesus learned that trade alongside of Joseph. But Jesus doesn't spend his days in vacation Bible school. His father's not a scholar. Joseph is not Jerusalem Institute graduate. He's just a worker. What I want you to understand here is that some of you in this room, you think, I can't have those beautiful traditions or I can't implement those things into my family because I didn't grow up that way. Even today, you may be thinking to yourself, well, you don't understand where I've come from. You don't understand what my family was like. We never prayed together. We never read together. We never were kind to one another. We never invited neighbors over. We were always the family that had to be invited over because we were so poor. We were the ones we never had anything. And I just want you to know that your Savior in heaven, he didn't either. His family was not pretty. His town was not significant. They did not have money. He got money from Toys for Tots. He got his presents from by organizational blessings. Jesus lived in no man's land so that he could understand every one of us. Yes, he's a king. Even the sky proclaimed that a king was born. The wise men were able to follow the stars and know that there was a king born in Israel. Yes, they brought him gold, frankincense, kingly and priestly, and even myrrh, antiseptic, the type of thing that a sacrifice, a substitutionary sacrifice would need because of the pain. Who would have written the plan this way? Who gets glory out of Bethlehem because of a census? Not even on their own. They're not even on vacation, y'all. They're there against their will. It's so packed in Bethlehem, they don't even have a place to stay. They have to stay in the cave. Who gets glory out of that? Who gets glory out of Nazareth? Who gets glory out of the Egyptian refugee? How can God get glory out of a poor, unnamed, unmarried, and during a census? How can God get such a plan? And then the angels, who must be clueless to how small this looks, because yes, mamas, we know you know your babies are perfect and beautiful, but to the rest of us, it's just another baby. Don't raise your hand or anything, but anybody in here ever seen a picture of somebody's baby when they put up there how adorable it is? See it, you're like, not. How many of y'all know some folks that you're like the only person who would think he's pretty is your mama? Here comes the wise men. They bow down. Like you said, I bet Joseph really was like, what's wrong with these guys? No way could God be a part of this. We had to travel while she was super pregnant. My own family didn't have a room for us. We had to have this baby in a cave. I don't even have the money to make sure he has a crib. He's in a manger. I'm out of sorts. I'm out of pocket. I've got nothing. And you've got the audacity to put gold in front of us? What are we going to do with that? Have you ever thought about that gold is probably what sustained them through the refugee time in Egypt? Joseph didn't have 2 pennies to put together. I bet you Joseph had a real hard time believing this was a king. And Mary, even 40, 50, 60 years later, she says, and I pondered these things in my heart. I bet she couldn't even say them out loud, because I bet Joseph was cutting her off every time. Oh, look at him, Joseph. I don't want to hear it, Mary. I don't want to hear another thing about it, okay? I heard that baby all night long. We're sleeping out here with the rooster. It starts crowing at 5 o'clock in the morning. I cannot hear another thing about that baby. But it coos just like the Son of God. Mary, I got to go for a walk. I got to walk somewhere. Do you remember what the shepherds said when they came? Yes, you keep telling me about the shepherds, Mary. These night shift drunk shepherds that came talking about tens of thousands of angels singing. Yeah, I bet they did think they were singing. Y'all know that night shift shepherds have to be like the worst shepherds, right? That's like the worst shift. They were eating in the fields at night, and here comes these guys, and they say, hey, some angels told us that the Son of God was born here, and we've been looking for him. Mary ponders these things in her heart, and I bet Joseph's thinking, oh, yeah. Yeah, the angels told you boys. I'm sure. He's got no one else to tell. We're 5 miles away from Jerusalem, all the priests you could ever want. And yeah, I'm sure the angels went on the side of Bethlehem and told a bunch of night shift shepherds, hey, you should go in there. Something important has been born. Yeah, sure. But Mary, she pondered these things. She treasured these things. She kept them in her heart. Now, I'm trying to rub us around a little bit in the humanity of this story, because I think often we forget just how far God can redeem any circumstance. Some of us are asking, how can God get any glory out of this? How much more has to be destroyed before God begins to redeem? God, I think you're overplaying your hand this time, God. I need you to wake up. I need you to do something. So yes, all the majesty is there. The kingship is there. Jerusalem finds out. The wise men come. There's signs in the sky. We see the bloodline is kingly, but in the same time, his bloodline is tainted. It's in Bethlehem, not Nazareth. He has to go to Egypt. They don't even have a place for him to sleep that night. And yet what he says to the shepherds, we're going to slip over to Luke chapter 2. Now Matthew chapter 2 talks about the wise men coming to Bethlehem through Jerusalem, but then they get to Bethlehem. That's not what you want. I mean, that's away from home for Mary and Joseph. Then it says they had to go to Egypt, and then when they went home to Nazareth. None of those things sound very kingly. When you go to Luke chapter 2, though, when the angels tell the shepherds, verse 8, it says, in the same region they were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. Now, just by the way, I'm not a conspiracy theorist or someone who wants to ruin our traditions, but there's a clue here that the implications are that this is during the first harvest. They were in the fields. The sheep were eating this was after the first harvest of the year. So most likely Jesus was born on Pentecost. Most likely. I mean, could be. Not fascinating to anybody. Well, it was to me. Okay, anyway. All right, great.
That's because they already bought gifts.
Yeah. We're not going to do this again, okay? We're going to leave it right where it's at. I'm just saying there's a good chance. All right, moving on. Verse 9, and an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were filled with great fear. And the angel said to them, fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. All the people. Not Galileans. Not just Israelis. Not just the Middle East. Not just those who are of Abraham's seed. All people. Even those 2,000 years later who sit in Askewville. What good can come from Askewville? Anything Jesus says so. Because we've been given good tidings of great joy. It's for all of us. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who was Christ the Lord.
And interesting, as you look at that and you read that Isaiah back in the Old Testament, in chapter 9, what does he write? If you remember what Isaiah writes as a prophecy, for unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. This will be his royal titles: Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. His ever-expanding peaceful government will never end. He will rule with perfect fairness and justice. From the throne of his father David, he will bring true justice and peace to all the nations of the world. This is going to happen because the Lord of heaven's armies has dedicated himself to do it.
Wow.
And declared by the fact, as you read, that his name was to be called what? Emmanuel, as we sang this morning. God with us. Full deity on display. Not only humanity, but full deity on display still. That the same one, I wonder if the angels that evening were even in there, as you read through this, fear not, for behold, I bring to you good news, great joy will be for all people, if they're reminded to themselves of what was said back in Isaiah before Christ was even born, before that even happened, what the prophecies were saying of the king that was coming, of this Jesus that was coming to earth, that he was going to be the wonderful counselor, mighty God.
So today what we want you to hear is that the majesty of heaven is crammed into our humanity. Christmas is the majesty of heaven crammed into our humanity. The eternality of God stuffed into our finiteness. Jesus, God in a bod, has come to earth, and he enters every single one of our stories. No matter what you come from, it's not different. It's not worse than what Jesus came from. No matter what you came into, it's not worse than what Jesus came into. No matter what you have seen over your life, Jesus, as the high priest who can have compassion with us, he understands exactly what we're going through. Not a single thing can you endure that he doesn't understand. His family, he understands what you've come from. So I want you today to remind yourself of the beauty and the glory of what Christmas means. The majesty of heaven comes and enters into our humanity, our humility. There's nothing that he cannot affect. So there's two things I want you to get out of this, and then we'll let Pastor Kevin close 3 times. One thing I want you to understand is, first of all, you've been invited into this great story. Have you received the love, joy, hope, and peace that comes through the knowledge of Jesus entering into your story? Aren't you grateful that you found the love, joy, hope, and peace of being connected to God the Father, Jesus Christ, the God who has come and lived on earth with us so that he could understand? Aren't you grateful? Understanding that he entered into your story also is a reminder that you have no excuse. You cannot cite any circumstance of your life and say, well, because of that, I'm given a free pass. We get no free passes because Jesus entered into all of it. If that's the case for us, how much more should we be inviting others into that story? The person that has caused you the most grief and heartbreak this year, what if this year the majesty of heaven crammed into their humanity and they received love, joy, hope, and peace for the first time, or for the first time in a long time? Keep hope alive, because there's nothing Jesus can't redeem.
How many of you remember the scripture that says, taste and see that the Lord is good? And the truth is, this Christmas, as we're gathered around and as you have tasted the love and the joy and the hope and the peace that Christ has to give, as you have tasted of that in your own life, I wonder how important it is that we truly think of the importance that we must imitate Christ to our own families, to those that are around us. As we were looking at this and just preparing this, I told Pastor Webb, I was reminded, and I'm sure I've shared this before, that I don't ever remember a time in my life when I've been around my dad, when I was a boy, at his home, when I go now to his home, when we go on family vacation, there's never been a day in my life, and that is with 100% truthfulness. I would hope that everything I say is, but just to emphasize that I don't remember one day that I've never seen my father, and there wasn't necessarily a specific time, wasn't necessarily every morning at 6 o'clock, it wasn't necessarily every evening at 5 o'clock. Taught me kind of 2 things, that there's some liberty with God. God is not angry at you if you don't wake up every single morning at 5 o'clock and spend 3 hours in prayer with him. Some of you do that, and that's incredible. I wish I could. But the thought is that we find time at some point every day. I don't ever remember a day that I've never seen my dad not sitting either at the table or in a chair reading the scripture. reading and studying the Bible with his pen, highlighting and writing things and marking things. Never one day of my life have I ever gone without seeing my dad sitting there doing that. On every day of his life, inviting God to be a part of who he was. And saying, Father, teach me. Teach me the importance of your word. Teach me the importance of your scripture. Teach me the importance of who you are through what you're trying to say. And as we look at this scripture, as we look at the humanity and the deity of Christ, as we look at where he came from and who his lineage was and the family line that he came into the world through, all the mess ups and the craziness of it all, and the kings and the prostitutes, the shepherds and the wise men. And his cry to us this morning is that, hey, will you just simply take a moment in your everyday life to invite him to be a part of it? Would you take a moment in your everyday life to do as the wise men did, come and bow before the king? Would you significantly bring some gold? Not just significantly, to say, God, I lay everything that's of importance, that cost me something, I lay it at your feet. I lay my life as a sacrifice because it costs me something. I lay it at your feet, God. I just want to learn from you. I want to know you because you are king. You did come to this earth. You are my high priest. I don't have to do anything. I come directly to you. You did pay a sacrifice. You were fully human and died. You paid a sacrifice for my life. And this morning, God, this day, every day, I desire to bring you in and have you a part of that. Of your life personally, of your family, and then of those that are around you. How incredible life would be and the life of those around us if we simply took a moment every day to invite Jesus to be a part of it. How transforming your life would be. How transforming the lives of those around you would be if you took a moment every day to invite Christ to be a part of it.
Thank you for joining the Askewville Assembly of God Sermon Podcast. For more information on our ministry, please visit our website at askewvilleassembly.com